I mean, speak of you. So if you speak, I get you.
Welcome everybody to this session of the Literary Lounge, which is a collaboration between the Luxembourg Review and the University of Glasgow. And this series is it's a thing by spearheaded by Dr. Colin Hurd. And Moyen to you, Pierre, for joining us. Moyen.
Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon to you, everybody.
So I first met Pierre in Luxembourg. I think this was when you were having your, I think this is when The Agony of Ivy was being played at the National Theatre de Luxembourg. And I remember going up to Pierre and asking him for some poems in my newly formed Luxembourg Review. And you were very kind and gracious to give us some of your poems. And we published In Betweenness and I think it was The Stanker, those two poems. And so Pierre, there's a wonderful introduction to Pierre, which I've seen in this interview called From Asymptote magazine, which said, throughout his career as a poet, translator, scholar, and editor, Joris has advocated for these middle places. He has always been drawn to the minor, more difficult work of both well and lesser-known poets, disrupting canonical ways of reading and practicing the idea that there is no at-homeness here, but only an ever-displaced drifting. And, like Pierre is such a iconic figure in Luxembourg, and obviously a very well-regarded poet, translator, and of course theater writer, as I learned. So can you please give a warm welcome to Pierre Joris?
Thank you.
I'd love to invite you to read some poems.
All right. Okay, so I'll start by reading very old material that just came out brand new in the latest book that came out in Luxembourg, given that we're reviewing Luxembourg here. So this is from Fox Tales, Trails and Trots, or the other way around. And I'll read some of the early Fox poems. They were written in the 70s in London, so this all connects in some odd web here. The first Fox poems were dedicated to my father, le docteur Roger Joris, chasseur et chirurgien extraordinaire. And it actually opens with a hexagram from the I Ching, hexagram number 64, Wei Qi, before completion, the judgment before completion, success. But if the little fox, after nearly completing the crossing, gets his tail in the water, there is nothing that would further. 1. Stare the moon in the eye, press your thumb on it. It will ring a bell, ring a bell. 2. From the inside towards the inside, circling hawk around the well, matters of eyes and. 3. The fox's tail's on fire, a fine story, looking for a new geography. 4. Bone meal, meet your fate, a circling, dissolving in an upside-down hourglass. 5. A shaggy fox story. Outside my dream.
In 4.4 miles, turn, take a slight.
Outside my dream, he stood in the dark room's darkest corner, a hairy grandfather clock. 6. Moon clock, my goddess, you're covering your face, the white fullness of it, with your broken off hands. 7. Fox, mother fox, in a spring night's last light, I watched your brood play with the torn off wing of a bird, fanning the light. 8. When I found you howling at the new moon, what were you doing? What were you missing, my red one? 9. Drunk I was not. You and your broken leg, the only thing we had in common was the forest. I turned away from the clearing when they clubbed you to death. 10. At a secret meeting in the Green Forest, you were accused of disturbing the holy Grand Police's sleep by the less than holy tongues of a rainy Pentecost. 11. Not yet, little fox. You've nearly made it. Hear me now. Don't drag your tail so close to the water. 12. For success, therefore, carry your tail high in the air, which is not high-tailing it, but closer to the essential erection. 11. Cousin, did you ever spend time in the emergency ward, say 3 a.m.? What struck me as strange the first time was that they all blamed you. 14. You have moons for eyes, I said, and what could you have answered had you been here with or without your 7 eyes, lives? 15. Some silly offspring of yours digging the kids in summer camp got all hung up on human food and wound up in a zoo. Today the paper said that, quote, despite a dehumanization course, the animals still preferred humans. 16. Great to see you, little red one, in a bad English movie. You were the only real character in that technicolor landscape, standing there, pissing on the leaves. 17. With a prize on your head, poison pellets in your path, and a frothing virus at your mouth, I nearly doubted you. 18. I'm waiting for you, cousin, waiting for you to show yourself to my dream, in my dream. 19. The sharp twist of beauty gleams along the fracture line of your leg. Absorbed, you lick the blood, oblivious of him who set the trap. 20. As a grandfather clock in a corner of Grandma's ghostly guest bedroom, I was quite scared of you. But when several nights later, looking out the window, I saw you beyond the fields at the forest's edge under the cool moon as a hairy grandfather clock, for a second, it nearly made me laugh. 21. Today, Victoria brought back a mass of old plates of your family members. I don't know, Red, but you had some ugly motherfuckers among your kin. 22. Watch it, baby fox. Don't bite your mummy in the belly. She's sleepy, and if she wakes, she'll shriek and bite your head off, 'cause she's a foxy lady. 23. The devil take you, cousin. I mean, I could have killed myself stumbling through this dark forest. You must have blown your cool, cousin, or a fuse, to want to switch the moon off, pissing on it. So that was the early poems. Obviously, as you know, those of you know who Luxembourg a bit, the national poem is the Reynard, which is the beautiful Luxembourgish version of Goethe's Reinecke Fuchs, but with the language from every town, every different village where the animals come from. So it is much more interesting linguistically than the German classic one. And I tried to write a long follow-up on that poem where the fox gets exiled and stows away on Christopher Columbus's boat and arrives in America to hang out with Coyote, his cousin, and do things. But that's for another time and still not completely written. How am I doing time-wise here? I'm good. Let me read. There's a lot of prose in this book, which I won't read. So I'll read the two poems that conclude this book. And so we're back in New York, but in the first one, we're with a Luxembourg American from earlier the century and last century called Steichens 8, a photographer, well known, Edward Steichen. In fact, this is what Steichen says. In fact, every photograph is a fake from start to finish, a purely impersonal, unmanipulated photograph being practically impossible. Edward Steichen. Leben 8, ich weiß nicht, ob du an Spruch nach gekannt hast. That's why I'll address you in American English. You were born to Baven by Reza in Luxembourg. I was not. You were an American citizen. I'm still not. Actually, I am now and became one after Trump was elected. I am also a citizen of Luxembourg. You believed in the family of man. I'm wary of families of any order and species. But you are a family. In that photo by Dana, those clear blue eyes, Luxembourg eyes exactly like Cousin Lol's. The cut of the face too, there's a resemblance close to the bone, close to the farm. A way in which the head is held, high and loose. You're my homeboy of old, Ed, a cousin, maybe even cousin germain, as the French would say. Now you burnt your paintings when your gardener imitated one of yours. A strange act, a criticism of the representation of representation, maybe? Or just a cheap trick to prove Duchamp wrong for saying stupide comme un peintre, and move on to new technologies. Now, I never burned a single poem, have kept them all. But then you had Carl Sandburg in the family, devoted companion for long walks and writing for you. I have always hated taking photos, but bought a camera at 60 to shoot landscapes and the family of one Joris, and half a dozen friends. But I have always leave it at home or forget that it is in my pocket. You were a famous delphinium breeder. I only brood over words, make poems and make anthologies, weird cut flower bouquets. I'm in Albany, New York, and sometimes visit Buffalo, where you did avant-garde color autochromes the year Ford introduced the Model T Ford, and 1 year after Picasso painted the Demoiselle. Ah, the autochrome, hot off the 1903 minds of the Frères Lumière. Them I've done seen the light, brothers. First marketed in our year 1907, it is an additive method, a process involving millions of microscopic grains of potato starch. Did you ever think of the Luxembourg staple food, gromper, when you loaded the camera? Dyed bright blue violet, bright orange red, a Kelly green, dusted on a slightly concave piece of glass already coated with liquid pitch mixed with a dram of beeswax to keep it tacky. The random spaces filled with lamp black and a panchromatic silver halide emulsion. The resultant screen was stochastic in nature, a random array in abstraction way beyond the Demoiselle's demure cubism. So the light you let pass through the photosensitive plate coming off your subjects, say Charlotte Spalding in Buffalo, with the starch grains remaining as aligned as the starch in her lacy dress, organized this randomness into plain Edwardian beauty. Ed, you were no Edwardian. You were just the Luxembourg lad in America who made good and moved with ease between Condé Nast and this here place 50 years before Warhol. If I'm trying so hard to understand this autochrome process, of which you said, no medium can give me color of such wonderful luminosity, it is because you also said, quote, if you don't take doors off their hinges, how are you going to know to put the doors back on their hinges? End of quote. Though that, Cousin Ed, may be where we disagree. Why put the doors back on the hinges? Beauty will bolt anyway, and we're all ever left with is the beauty of doing the work, the handwork, the hands-on work, your plates, my words. Merci, Cousin, das gut zu wissen, dass du hier warst für mir. Thanks, cousin. It's good to know that you were here before me. So that was for Cousin 8. And then I'll read you a translation of a poem I was asked by an American to write in Luxembourgish because he's doing an anthology of all the languages spoken in New York, which is over 330 officially, but if you check on it, there are about 3,000 languages and dialects somewhere floating around. But I'll read you my own American translation, called a poem in Luxembourgish about New York. It opens with a quote by Paul Celan, because to speak like one's mother means to dwell even there where there are no tents. It wasn't even around Pentecost, and nothing was flowering, but it was an overheated day, mid-February and mid-town, when twixt Anselm Kiefer at the Breuer Met and Wagner's Parsifal at the Met Opera, I sat down in the middle of Central Park on a bench exactly twixt these 2 euro cultural affairs to write this poem. Don't buy that hot dog, nor any of those nuts, too much sugar in both, but look at that white horse. That nag makes no mistakes. It eats its oats and works through this heat, head bowed, gemütlich. It shows New York to the tourists much better than I could. And the horse is neither sad sack nor amused, like anything or person pulling some form of transport conundrum through New York. It is he or she smiling, sullen or sullenly smiling and about ready to nap. I nod to the nag, which doesn't nod back, busy as it is to rhythmically nod its head following its heavy trot. And I keep nodding, body-mind caught in rhythm of horse's nod, the clop-clop of its hoofs. And 100 meters to the right, the quick, nervous bang-bang of jazz drums. It's all one gorgeous rhythmic mess. It is the beating heart of New York, and thus the true heartbeat of America. Even if I am, no, not caught, but strolling or sitting in the sun between 2 euro references. But in the middle of the heat of this city, I fell in love with exactly 50 years and 7 months ago, even if not always faithful. And now I need a table and a cup of coffee. A question. The waitress's head raised, straight up, I say, then sit down right in the window of the European Cafe. The name and the place does not translate into Café Europe, my old hangout on the Plus, there where Columbus and Broadway intersect. And now bring this poem to a close. So that was from Fox Trails. I have a couple of minutes left to read.
Yes,
Just our...
of course.
Okay. So let me now go to very recent material. This is material from a book that's going to be called Yellow Hook Notes. Yellow Hook was the old name of Bay Ridge, where I am right now. They changed the name because yellow refers to yellow fever, and that brought down the real estate prices. So, you know, Bay Ridge sounded better. Bay, you know. Some of these poems will appear in an anthology here, an Echo Poetics anthology that will come out later this year. Owl's Park, the bedly named. No owl seen here, but I'm reading in the manuscript of Jerome Rothenberg's forthcoming anthology of the Americas, and I'm told that in Narragansett, an owl is called Kokokehom, or Homus, and that the other bird I do see often here in the park, the crow, is called Kaukontwok. There are birds, says Roger Williams, born in England 1603, died here in 1683, that, quote, although they do the corn also some hurt, yet scarce will one native amongst the 100 kill them, because they have a tradition that the crow brought them at first an Indian grain of corn in one ear and an Indian or French bean in another, from the great god Kautanwet's field in the southwest, from whence they hold came all their corn and beans. That immigrant Britisher chronicler, at least he was interested in native languages. That clerk or Claire couldn't tell an Indian or French bean from one another. Ach, colonization is hard work. Bay Ridge, foghorn, is not dice cup. The repetition is exact. The desire or aim is to avoid disaster, shipwreck. The sound repeats at intervals of 10 seconds, the time it took to type the sentence. Which one? Not this one. In the darkness of late night, or is it early morning, the foghorn abolishes chance. The cargo ship that lies at anchor in the Narrows, bow towards the open sea beyond the bridge, and beyond that beyond too, is called the Minerva. It has an owl's profile painted between the anchor hole and the M that opens its name. You do not see it. It is a memory. Cup of plenty. Light comes up. Every 10 seconds the foghorn. Not a siren. No sirens here on the water. Can a siren go into the water? The ship's name, so vessel tracker informed on closer inspection, is Minerva. The family name. The company name? Julie, first name. Minerva Julie is from Greece, or at least flies the Greek flag. She is 183 meters long with a beam of 32.0 meters. She's moored, not at anchor. A vessel is said to be moored when it is fastened to a fixed object or the seabed, or to a floating object such as an anchor buoy. A mooring buoy is a white buoy with a blue band. While many mooring buoys are privately owned, some are available for public use. Always check before tying to any mooring buoy. Days here now. Trust your eyes. Julie is invisible. The foghorn, inaudible, must have stopped. Julie is a large orange vessel. Autobiography is a goldfish, someone wrote, and the line keeps coming back. Across the street there is a pond, murky to say the least, right there. But if you stay and stare long enough, you will catch out of the murk from time to time an orange flash, the back of a goldfish breaking surface. Whose life disappears beneath the shabby lotus leaf? Whose autobiography? That was yesterday. Walk by the pond today, and it is an empty oblong with black mud at bottom slowly drying up. Only fair. The falling leaves reveal more and more water surface across the Narrows, so the pond can go until the leaves come back. Where have the goldfish gone? Looks like the turtles went first. Someone took them home, someone said. But the goldfish, they will have disappeared into someone else's autobiography. I cannot approach them at this point, not from this angle. We will see. She says, the lotus flowers, where have the lotus flowers gone? The foghorn has not sounded since that first time. The weather has held a straight course, you might say. Light morning gusts across the narrows. This morning, Sinbad is not a sailor, but a tanker out of Barbados. Tanker, tinker, sailor, spy. Who is the most polluting of them all? And let me close with a little poem here from that same sequence, written during a Zoom reading, which is what we're doing these days, right? During a Zoom reading by Jerome Rothenberg. 2,000 run-of-the-mill Buddhas tread water. There are no mirrors anywhere in the world, only others. In several parts, the whole is and is not. The whole is and is not in separate parts. In acts of cruelty, the present is miscarried again and again. Time, you say, is a bullfight. I say time is kneeling in the sand hour before the bull. And to close, a haiku for the end of the world. Gaia world. Sapiens, not so sapiens. Boom, kaboom. Thank you.
Before we go into the next part, thank you so much for that reading, Pierre. I love that autobiography is a goldfish. Absolutely stunning. Yeah, this is just for the audience. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. If that's okay, if you can put it up in the chat, it'll be lovely to see which part of the world you're tuning in from. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And I was just wondering, this book, you know, it's published in Luxembourg now. It's a new, you know, like it's a new English, you know, literary press. Like the Luxembourg Review is also in English. So just in that regards, like over the years, you know, like how you've sort of seen Luxembourg sort of change in the literary scene. I'd love to know more about that.
Listen, I haven't lived in Luxembourg since 1965 when I left to go to Paris to go to university. I've only been there for weeks or so on. But I have kept coming back. And at one point in, it must have been the late 70s or the early 80s, I met some of the writers then. I had never thought there was much happening in Luxembourg writerly-wise, which is why I left when I was 18, 19, you know. I met Roger Manderscheid, a wonderful Luxembourgish writer, and so on. In Paris, somebody came to visit me, a young guy who had just dropped out of teaching in Luxembourg, gone to Paris to become a poet. That was Jean Portange, you know. And I met man who started a small press in Luxembourg, and that press was Edition Fille, and he published, my first book published in Luxembourg was actually a book in English that was published in '87, the year I moved back from Paris to New York. So it has been going on and on in this, you know, this, I mean, it's nearly a cat's cradle that is woven between, or that I'm weaving myself between the continents. And it's been very interesting that of my generation, there is a number of writers. I mean, Roger was a bit older, but people like Lambert Schlechter, Nico Helminger, who writes in German and in Luxembourgish, you know, there's very good writers in the country of that generation. I feel that I ran away maybe a bit too early, but for me, there was a need to find another language. So,
you keep coming back, so I'm sure you're seeing a lot of the. Can you hear me?
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So you keep coming back, and you see a lot of the. It's sort of like changing a lot with the times, and this book that you've published, this new, slightly newer book, I'd say, with the edition Simoncini.
With Simoncini, yeah.
Yeah. The Book of You is a fascinating. It's just like it's both in English and in French. Yes, I have my copy of it. I got it from the owner himself. He gave me a copy, and was absolutely blown away by this, absolute sequence and the spacing you used, and both the translation and the English version. So I was wondering how this
translation is by Nicole. It's Nicole Nicole Peyrafitte, my wife and collaborator. She translated them. So
full translation, and I think I showed it to my brother, who's not doesn't really read much poetry, and even he was astounded by it. So I'm wondering, in this particular book, how the sequence came to be.
Oh, some years ago, I was pretty sick. Getting healthy meant taking long walks. Right in front of us here, the Narrows, which is the harbor of New York, the inlet from the Atlantic to New York. You can walk for several miles along the water. So walking along the water, Nicole and I saw a lot of cormorants. And so I began writing little cormorant poems. I fell in love with the cormorants because they're such absolutely amazing, gorgeous birds. I checked my notebooks when I began putting this book together and realized that I'd written some cormorant poems way back when. That the first cormorant poet I discovered was in Paris in '65 when I was reading a haiku by Basho. And so, in fact, a friend of ours here who's of Japanese origin gave me the name in Japanese, where the sound you make to say cormorant is U. So the letter U, which is why the book is called The Book of U, of U. And so that fascination with the birds kept going with me. And a lot of them I wrote into my iPhone as we walked. I just kind of recorded them. I talked them. And then I would transcribe them when I got home. Now, the organization of the book itself, that happens the way it happens. There was no grand plan. You put them together, you look at them. I mean, I started with the earliest one on the West Coast and then moved them here and, try to make a sequence. If that is helpful.
Very helpful. Thanks, Pierre. So there's a sense of drifting within that as well. And alluding to that earlier interview that I gave, that I spoke of, in the same interview you used the phrase "a nomadic drift" or transhumance between Europe and the United States, to sort of describe yourself to a large extent as well. So I was just wondering, according to you, what is a nomadic poet? And if you describe yourself as that, having lived in Europe, having lived in North Africa, having lived in the US, and how that sort of plays into your poetry and politics.
Well, it plays into the poetry from the beginning on. As a Luxembourger, I'm writing in a language that's not the mother tongue. So there is this myth that you can only write in the mother tongue. My relation with Celan would probably have been different if early on I had discovered that he said, you cannot write a poem if you don't write it in the mother tongue. Outside of the mother tongue, the poet lies. That's my one great point of total disagreement with Celan. I think I finally staked with, I hope, as much force somewhere saying that all languages are foreign languages. There is no mother tongue. And if you want to look at it under that angle, fatherland and mother tongue are a kind of old Freudian triangle with fascistoid and bourgeois, sites. So my Nomadics wants to break that up because I think that, I can sum it up. You know how? Today or tomorrow at the Berlin Festival, there's a little video of me going up where I say a 56-second manifesto. Let me read you the opening part of that. It says, 1, the days of anything static, form, content, state are over. The past century has shown that anything not involved in continuous transformation hardens and dies. All revolutions have done just that. Those that try to deal with the state as much as those that try to deal with the state of poetry. So the nomadic comes out of that, has to, is there. And I say, 2, keep in mind that what Georges Bataille calls the fascist temptation is not only a 20th century aberration, but a species-specific permanent risk for Homo sapiens, or stupidus. 3, as far as moral or social values are concerned, total miscegenation is the only solution. Purity is the root of all evil. 4, betweenness is our essential nomadic condition, a becoming that crosses borders, is borders, lives on and in borders. So that's the latest summing up of the both literary and political nomadic manifesto.
Okay. You seem to enjoy manifestos. We'll get back to that. We'll get back to that in a bit. So Paul Celan, obviously, you've been associated with him for a very long period of time, with many books of translations, including the one which was nominated for the PEN Translation Award and many others like that. So what introduced you to Paul Celan, and what made you sort of start getting into translating him?
In high school, in Diekirch, my high school German teacher brought in a peripatetic actor to read us poetry. We were a bored bunch of kids sitting there, and we're hearing this stuff, wah, ba, 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 la, la, la. All of it, and then he read, in the middle of that, he read Celan's Todesfuge. This is 61, I think. He read Celan's Todesfuge, and that went through me, and I've written that like a knife through butter. It was like the one complete mystical experience I had. And I realized that there was a use of language here that had nothing to do with the way we use language, either at home or speaking on the street, or how it is used in, quote, literature. This was something else. So I identified this then with poetry. And it is at that moment that I began to turn towards poetry. It took some few more years before I decided to break with my Luxembourg bourgeois habit, which wanted me to become a doctor, and dropped out of medical school and decided to become a poet. Celan was always with me. When I went to America to study, because I decided to write in English, I carried Atemwende, the volume that had just come out, with me, and used that at Bard College proposed that as my dissertation, to translate it into English, which was kind of crazy. Here I was trying to learn English, and then decided to translate, the most complex German language writer. But I think it was one of the great decisions, one of the best ones I ever made, because it taught me how to learn English. It forced me to learn English and to move to a non-standard, if you want, English. I was already into the beat poets, and so on and so on. Moved me away from British English, which was what we'd learned in high school, moved me into American English, but at the level where I realized you have to recreate the language, remake the language when you write. So, and then Celan stayed with me. It became okay. When I taught in Constantine, Algeria, I kind of reworked those translations. I had a lot of time on my hands. and translated a new book, which was very strange because here I'm sitting in an oasis in the Sahara in the Hotel Transatlantique, which is a great name for a Saharan hotel. And, you know, here I'm sitting and I'm translating into a notebook this German language poet, his late work. That, you know, it was a wonderful, complete way of disorienting myself and keeping myself nomadically displaced in my mind as much as in the practical work I was doing. And then I figured, well, he gave me poetry. I owe him, as Maurice Blanchot would say, une dette infinie, an infinite debt. And so I wound up continuing translating him until I had all the late work done, published that book, published those in 4 books, then gathered them in 14 into 1 book. I thought I was done, but then the publisher of FSG, Jonathan Galassi, said, why don't you do the first one too? And of course, I was a sucker and fell for it. And so I spent the last 3 years translating all those early ones. But now, 51 years later, I'm done.
Achievement, you know, translating such a large volume of work. So just wondering, so you moved from Luxembourg from Europe to the States.
Here's the proofs. Here's the galley of the new volume. That's coming out in November 4th, okay, for the 100th birth year of Celan.
Okay. So you moved from Luxembourg to the United States, and so in that regard, when you moved to the United States, what was the literary scene like over there, and who were like the up-and-coming writers, and who were like the established writers at that time that you
let's
sort of...
put it this way. I moved from Luxembourg to Paris. In Paris, I stayed when I dropped out of medical school. My father cut me off financially, so I moved into a Shakespeare Company, where I met a bunch of young poets and older poets. My roommate was Mohamed Khaireddine, the great Moroccan poet. I met James Baldwin there. I met people of that order. I was into the beats, which I discovered in the one erotic bookshop in Luxembourg. They had, by mistake, put the beats in there as wanker books. When I got to New York, I went to Bard College, where Robert Kelly, great poet, was, and via him I discovered that other side of American poetry, which we didn't know in Europe at all, which was the Black Mountain people, Charles Olson, Robert Duncan, Robert Creeley, and I already knew among the beats, Bob Kaufman, the one black beat poets, interested me a lot. So I was checking out that variety of poets. The thing is that there was a vast variety of possible poetries in America at that moment that made the greatness of the place. There were a lot of women writing very interesting stuff. It was even, it's better now even, but it is very major. I would say that of my generation, there are maybe more interesting, women poets are more interesting than the boy poets. I proposed to Adonis some years ago that we would that I would put together an anthology of the 20 best current American poets, make them all women, that we would then have translated into Arabic to have an anthology to go to the Arab countries. Anyway.
Oh, that's a collection I would love to see. So yeah, I'm really intrigued by your book, The Meditations on the Stations of Al-Hallaj. That's something that caught my eye almost immediately. And, it's set up in the backdrop of the American invasion of Baghdad. And it's like Mansur al-Hallaj was a very incredible figure that you put out in the book, a bit of his history saying, I am the truth. And he was sort of destroyed for that. He was imprisoned for that. And, a very sort of in the political sense, you know, like back then, that was so sort of, even now, that's not something one would say, you know, in the Islamic world. So anyways, in terms of, I'd love for you to read some poems from there, if that's possible, and just to know on your you know, just to know about your understanding of the politics of then, and then setting the book against the backdrop of the invasion of Iraq, how that came to be.
I've always had an interest in mystical religions, in the sense that I'm totally non-religious and loathe any organized religion. But clearly there are people in all kind of places, be it St. Francis talking to the birds, or be it Mansur al-Hallaj saying Ana al-Haq, who on their own private path to whatever the truth is for them. You know, Ana al-Haq means I am the truth. He was the truth for himself. You know, he was. So I was thinking and reading around that material, and then when the war happened, I was here in New York, and they began bombing Baghdad. Obviously, Mansur al-Hallaj, who was a Baghdadi, you know, came to mind. And so I decided to write a sequence of poems based on al-Hallaj's own teachings on the words, on 40 words that sum up his teaching. And I thought I would write them quick to help end the war, and I had to write them more slowly because the war kept lasting and lasting. So let me read you the first and the last poem. 1. Manners, adab. What is the manner? I mean the matter with you standing there in the desert. Take your hands out of your pockets. The desert has no manners, but many pockets, which is no excuse for your lack of know-how when it comes to sharing. This last pinch of hot sand and mica hides as lint in the pockets of your heart. The last poem, 40, beginning, bidaya. The end is in the beginning. The end is the beginning. The troops have left. Have the troops left? I can finish what I began when they first invaded and promised not to end until they all had left. The troops have left. Have the troops left? Too easy to claim an end as a new beginning. Nothing begins anew. Nothing ends for keeps, except the lives of those killed by the bullets, put money into the pockets of those sold you the war, those who never had their hands in their own pockets, those who never stood in any desert except their own hearts' alkali wastes, and to lint in their pockets soaked through with spent blood now pulled from pockets and flicked onto the desert's face. Thousands of lives stubbed out like camel butts. The troops have left. Have the troops left? US, you know Orestes. Iraq, you know Argos, says Najem Wali. Sartre's flies did not leave. The load thereof keeps buzzing. Both, but Sumer shall rise again. Baghdad will be Baghdad again. Others who be the truth, al-Haq, will be put to life and to death. Other poets will write and celebrate. Oh, now then let's begin the begin. Bedaya the Bedouin, bring back the sound of a music so tender, a night of desert splendor. Bring back a memory of green in a rapture so serene that what was raging fires now are glowing memory embers. Desire not dead. Desire not dead. And if the city hurt you, walk out into the deep pockets of the desert, the place we all came from, the place we shall all return to. Mansour, Mansour, lead the dance.
Thing I really appreciated about this book was how it, like when I first started reading it, it's something like it sort of placed me in that time, and then the sort of the transitioning from then, the language, in terms of language, sort of transitioning from there into the more sort of ingraining the more sort of modern languages and idioms and everything that you brought into it. And I found that transition absolutely fantastic in the book.
Thank
so
you.
So the political, in terms of in terms of politics, you've always been very sort of political in nature in terms of just everyday life and your poetry as well. And now recently you've created a new manifesto in regards to what's happening within the political sphere of the United States at the moment. So you're part of this Writers Against Trump. Is it a collective? And
It's a collective. I didn't create it. It's Paul Auster, Siri Hufstedt, their daughter Sophie, a few other people, Todd Gitlin, Caroline Fauché are the kind of founding members. And I didn't have anything to do with writing that manifesto, but they're friends, and they asked me in early on, and Nicole and I provided what they wanted, which are statements, like 1-minute video statements, which you can see on their website. If you go to Writers Against Trump, you'll get to the website. I think there are more than 1,300 writers who have signed up now, and also European writers. So just go up and sign your name to it. You don't need to do a video statement, but sign up. We need as many people as possible. There is this sense that in Europe, and I saw that in an article that was in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung 3 days ago, they spoke well of the movement, mentioning, of course, only Paul Auster and Siri Hufstedt, which are the ones known in Europe, the famous ones, and said how their statements were good, but then saying, oh, but that manifesto, that is like language trying to club things to death. That's the way that Trump uses language, and the writers should not do that. And I wrote a letter back. I don't know if they're going to publish it or not, but saying, hey, there is no time for stylistic niceties right now. Intellectuals and writers objected very politely in the 30s too. That did not stop the fascists from winning. That is the whole point, And there still is that sense. I mean, this is Switzerland, so we know they are the neutral ones always. But there is that sense that I still get when I think of Europe, Europeans looking at Trump. Oh, he's a clown. He's just a joke, a bad taste joke, but he's a clown. He'll go away in the next, elections, or maybe he's even there 4 more years. But that's not what's happening. He has undermined all the institutions that could put him in check. And the fear is that even if he loses in November, he will refuse to leave. He will bring in the militias and the armed forces, and basically America will become what he calls other countries shithole countries, right? He wants simply to take over the country. That's why he loves the really nastiest people running countries in the world, from Putin to North Korea to wherever. So we really are at a very, very dangerous moment in what was called the American democracy. It was never a perfect place, far not, because at the same time, look at what we have in relation to racism and that double reaction, Trump bringing in the racism, letting that racist core of America come to the fore again after the black president, it's that reaction. It's essentially the fear of the fact that over the next 10 to 15, 20 years, white people will become the minority in this country. Black and brown people will become the majority. And a great majority of the, or let's say at least half the white people are totally freaked out by this. And therefore, all the Christians and so on will sell their souls to put this fascist dictator in, just to keep white privilege going. So it's really a very, very difficult moment here. 57 days left.
Wow. Sylvie, I mean, who knows what will happen? I've stopped sort of seeing the world. So anyways, I think we can end on that note, because I think it's a very strong note, and we just open up the floor to some questions now. Before that, the next literary lounge session is with the Welsh Cameroonian poet Eric Ngale Charles. That's going to happen on the 16th of September, and I will put up the link here if any of you are would like to join in that session as well. So let's give a round of applause to Pierre Joris.
You guys, thank you.
And does anybody have any questions? We'll stay on the floor for about 5-10 minutes, and then we'll end the session.
No questions, just that was phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anika tuning in from Bangladesh. Okay, you don't seem to.
People have to unmute themselves if they want to speak. Maybe some mute questions are there, but
Chat box. Matthew Shelton is saying thank you so much for organizing, and thank you so much, Pierre. It's been an amazing pleasure to hear you read and speak on so many important issues, and thank you for.
Thank you, everybody, for being there. Thank you.
Pierre, thank you so much for being here so early in the morning as well. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for being a part of this literary lounge session, and hope to see many of you again in more coming up. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.